Selena Quintanilla's legacy lives on, not just in Tejano music, but as a cultural icon for generations of Latinos. Maria Garcia, creator of the podcast Anything for Selena, explores that singer's lasting impact. I sat down with Maria for a fun conversation about why Selena's story still resonates decades later. Maria, first, what inspired you to create Anything for Selena? Was there a specific moment when you knew, this story had to be told?
Yeah, well, it was sort of a lifelong dream. I grew up loving Selena. People ask me all the time, when was the first time you grew up? When was the first time you discovered Selena? And I tell them that growing up in on the border in El Paso and West Texas, there's no such thing as like discovering Selena. She was in the air. She was everything. It would be like discovering air, you just kind of absorbed her presence through osmosis. She was everywhere growing up. And I was a hardcore fan from the time I can remember, like 5, 6, 7 years old. And I grew up loving her. I was 9 years old when she was taken from us. And every year there's a lot of media around her birthday and the date of her passing. And it's always, very similar stories. And I knew that there was so much more to her legacy, and I really wanted something super in depth that would show that she changed the world and her impact. And so the podcast is a mix of really rigorous reporting, cultural analysis, and then memoir, because she was so near and dear to my own heart and to my own coming of age. So it's also about how Selena impacted me, like she has for millions of women.
How challenging was that? I mean, you obviously, you mentioned, and I listened already a couple of times your podcast because I love it so much. How hard was it to talk about and share such intimate moments in your life?
Yeah. Well, for anything for Selena, I wasn't planning on it being a podcast that braided my life as well. It sort of happened organically as I was reporting it. I realized, like, oh my God, this is so personal for me because, I'm very transparent with my audience. This isn't just like some objective look at Selena. This is, I had to be very clear, like, this is from the lens of somebody who has loved her their entire life. And as I was reporting about her, I realized that learning new details about her, speaking to her family, was bringing up a lot of unsettled feelings in my own life.
Can you give us an example of that? ¿Nos das un ejemplo de cómo se te removió todo?
Yeah, of course. When I was speaking with her father, for example, when I got to meet Abraham Quintanilla, growing up as a Selena fan, I had read everything about Abraham, and he's portrayed as just like a really scary dude. And so I went there like fully expecting, um, if I can just be totally honest, like maybe not to like him so much because the all the media about him makes him look so unlikable, including the Selena movie.
Claro.
Um, and what I found was a really nuanced, complex person. And what I found is that Selena's relationship with her father is portrayed sometimes very flatly. Like she was like this, um, really innocent, good girl, who, stood up to her father when she eloped. And he was kind of like this grouchy, overprotective, stringent father. And what I found is that those are sort of caricatures of both of them. Like they had a much more complex, layered relationship. Selena stood up to her father all of the time. Her father told me about how he had concerns about Selena starting her fashion business because it would distract her from music. And Selena put her foot down and said, "Nope, this is mine." And I'm going to do it, whether you support it or whether you like it or not. Um, and so Selena was like she was a strong, independent minded person. And her father did not, especially with her as an adult, did not. Um, I think he's portrayed sometimes as sort of like a dictator of her life, and that's not what I found. They had a
Mm.
more complex relationship. But getting to know him, when I went to talk to him, my father had just died the year before, and I was still very much processing that loss. And I was thinking a lot about father and daughter relationships in Mexican American and Latino communities as a whole. And so getting to know Abraham forced me to reckon with all these feelings I had about my own very complicated relationship with my father and my own questions about how he loved me and how he showed up in my life. And so there's an episode where it's me getting to know Abraham Quintanilla while at the same time wrestling with the memory of my own father.
You describe Selena as the bridge between two worlds, Mexican and American. Why do you think she remains such a powerful figure for Latino identity in the United States?
Yeah. Um, there's so many reasons. One, like, sometimes when people pass away, there will be fans who will say, oh, she was a presence that was bigger than life. She lit up a room. And so many times it's an exaggeration. But the thing with Selena is it's not. Like, we have a whole rich archive of videos of Selena from the 90s that make it so obvious that she really was an extraordinary human being. She really was the type of person who walked in and captivated a room. And we have, hundreds of people who met her who can testify to the power of her extraordinary charisma. So there was that. Um, she was truly bigger than life. But on top of that, she was such a true, talented, rigorous artist. Like she took her craft super seriously. Um, the way she emoted on stage, the way she embodied the feelings of her songs and performed them, and the way she danced, like nobody had done it
Mhm.
quite like her. And the reason for that is she was an American teen. She was an American young woman, who listened to R&B and Michael Jackson and a little bit of hip hop and disco, and all of that was infused into her own roots music because that's what Tejano is. It's Mexican American roots music. And so the sound that she and her brother AB and her sister Suzette and her father produced was truly really innovative in the musical landscape. It was an amalgamation of all of these American forces that could have only been created from their perspective, from Mexican Americans who grew up, listening to Tejano roots music, but who also had all the influences of just, everyday American teenagers. So there's that. But on top of that, people talk a lot about that she was about to cross over into the English market. But what people don't realize is that she had already crossed over into the harder market, which is to Mexico. And
I
oftentimes,
remember la película que dijo, I'm so excited en Monterrey cuando no encontraba las palabras.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And like, Mexican Americans and Mexicans in Mexico haven't always had like a super harmonious relationship, a lot of
Déjame te paro ahí, porque
uh,
antes de que se me olvide el pensamiento que estoy temando, en el podcast hablas del concepto de mexicanidad y lo que es ser probablemente un mexicano como tú o como yo.
mhm.
Selena retó las normas culturales, como estás diciendo, en ese país, en ese entonces. Ah,
Mhm.
in what ways do you think she redefined what it meant to be Mexican or Mexican American?
Yeah, she showed that you didn't have to be born in Mexico. You didn't have to speak perfect Spanish. You didn't have to know the history of Mexico perfectly. For you to be authentically Mexican and to claim those roots as your own. There's an interview of her that I love where she says, yo no nací aquí, yo no hablo español perfecto, pero yo me siento mexicana, yo sé que soy mexicana. Y ella nunca decía, yo soy mexicoamericana. No iba a México y decía, yo soy mexicoamericana. Ella decía, intencionalmente, yo soy mexicana. Y es como un mensaje muy poderoso porque está diciendo, am, yo sé que no soy, yo sé que no sueno igual que los mexicanos que viven en México, yo sé que no tengo la misma historia, yo sé que crecí en otro país, pero todavía tengo el derecho a mis raíces
Claro.
y a decir yo soy mexicana. Entonces, eso revolucionó, en mi opinión, eh, sí, quién tenía el derecho en los medios a decir yo soy auténticamente mexicana. Y Selena hizo eso.
I mean, no one has the right to question your identity. I mean,
Yes.
that's a reality. How has Selena's legacy evolved over time, especially with the digital age, where new generations discover her through social media and now with Spotify and all those streaming platforms?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're already seeing it, right? Selena has become cultural patrimony. Like she is a cultural treasure that generations pass on to the younger generations. And so now we see little girls who were not even alive when Selena was, who celebrate her, who dance like her, who create entire internet subcultures centered around her, Instagram accounts using AI of what she would look like now, remixes of her performances with like new sort of like TikTok and Instagram filters, TikTok dances. We see them. We see people in other countries and in Asian countries, even in Europe. We see people even in the Middle East, like dancing and singing to Selena. And so there's a timeless quality about her art that we are going to see uh, in generations to come, not just in the Latino community.
Um, I love the whole all the episodes in the podcast, but there's one that I got my attention from the beginning, and I think Leah, you
Yes.
also mentioned it, which is the politics of the butt. I mean, right? La política de las pompis, no sé cómo se llama en español, no me acuerdo. Explícanos un poquito cómo fue que pensaste. I mean, what was your thought process of including this topic in your own identity? Because bodies for Mexican females in Latino and Black communities is very important. So walk me through it.
Yeah, yeah. When we started identifying what episodes to do in the podcast, I knew immediately. I said, we absolutely have to do an episode about the way that she revolutionized like body image and body politics in the United States. And I knew that because I saw it personally, like as a little girl and a teenager and just like a young woman. I remember when I was 9 years old, 10 years old, and I was a huge Selena fan. One, I remember there was this huge emphasis on her body. Like the way the reporters talked about it, especially in Spanish media, there was always like, you know, um, mucha conversación sobre sus pompis o sobre sus curvas, and it was praised. It was seen as, here is this a beautiful woman with curves that resemble a lot of our community. And the thing is, growing up in a working class Mexican American community, like I never grew up thinking that big butts were something you had to get rid of. I grew up in my community seeing that big butts were like something that was desirable.
Mhm.
But I remember even when I was a little girl at the time in the 90s, making the connection that that was not the case in magazines, in movies, in sort of like the white prominent culture. It was the opposite. It was like big butts were looked down upon, like it was something undesirable that you had to work out to get rid of. And I remember thinking, like, it's so weird because it's the opposite in my community. And then I grew up, Selena was taken from us. J-Lo comes and plays Selena. And I remember when J-Lo was chosen to play Selena, a lot of the conversation around who would play Selena was like she had to have her body.
Mhm.
and specifically her butt. And then J-Lo comes along, and J-Lo really embraces this narrative. Like J-Lo doesn't mind. J-Lo hasn't minded, talking about her curves in interviews, but it's also because people constantly brought it up with her, right? And that narrative started because of Selena. And so even after the movie Selena, though, J-Lo takes off with that narrative, and we see the American public opinion at a mainstream level shift in one generation from thinking that butts were something you had to get rid of to the BBL era, which is like everybody wants a big butt. And the thing is, I don't think it's as simple as saying, oh, Selena revolutionized butt culture in the United States because she had a big butt. And then people were like, whoever plays her has to have a big butt. And then J-Lo embraced that narrative and she went with it. Sure, that's the origin of the modern history. But really, it doesn't, it's not as simple because it doesn't start there. And we see that, in fact, the fascination with specific curves, including the butt, especially in like American culture, stems from a history of racism
Mm.
and the way that sort of like white society has exoticized Black women and their bodies. And so there have always been actresses and singers, Black actresses and singers who had beautiful curves, but they were never praised for it to the degree that Jennifer Lopez was. And that's in part, I theorize, is because there's something racially ambiguous about Jennifer in a way. And so she was palatable enough to a white audience where she was able to make the butt desirable. And that's sort of my theory. And the podcast episode sort of takes you step by step in building that argument.
Mhm.
But yeah, I don't argue that Selena was sort of like this bastion of what we now call body positivity. She was a thin woman with curves. But I do believe that the way she embraced her curves, the way she didn't hide from them, the way she celebrated who she was. And it wasn't so much about the male gaze. You never got the sense that it was like to be sexy for men, but
Mm.
on the contrary, it was sort of to celebrate her womanhood and to give other women permission to do it too. And I believe that that revolutionized body politics in America forever.
That's so interesting. Anything for Selena resonated with many people beyond just Selena fans. Why do you think it connected so deeply with audiences?
Hmm. Well, I think there's a lot of universal themes in Selena's story that we can all identify with. Her nuanced relationship with her father, her autonomy and strength and independence as a woman in an industry controlled by men. There was this thinking when Selena started in Tejano, the conventional thinking was that women couldn't really succeed because other women didn't want to go see them, that like other women didn't want to go sit in the audience and see a beautiful woman on stage because it would threaten them, or they wouldn't want their boyfriends like looking at this woman. And Selena proved that that was not true. Like women wanted to see another woman shine because this was at a time in the mid 90s where assimilation was so prized, and Mexican American communities were so pressured to assimilate into sort of a wider white culture. And here was this woman saying, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to embrace my roots. I'm going to embrace my heritage. I'm going to celebrate who I am. I'm not trying to be white. And she did that in big and small ways. Yes, with her words, but also little things, her aesthetic, the big crimson lips, the big hoops, her sort of like frizzy hair. Like it was all these like little signals that was showing us like this is a very specific Mexican working class aesthetic. I'm still embracing it. I still am who I am. I can be successful in this country. I can ascend in the United States without compromising my authenticity and my roots. And there's a universal message for that, whether you're Latino or Black or Asian or Middle Eastern or even white, that you don't have to compromise who you are to get the success that you need,
Yeah.
and that you desire. And I think Selena's a great example of that.
What has been the most memorable response you've received from listeners?
Oh, I think I still get so many heartfelt messages. Like people really open up their heart and tell me about how the podcast made them cry, because they saw themselves in the story, and to me, that's the most beautiful thing. The fact that something I made with a lot of love for Selena, my homage to her, is touching people in really deep ways and maybe helping them heal this part of themselves, that, maybe tried to assimilate or has these sort of wounds around identity when they were younger.
Mhm.
That's the most beautiful thing.
Very nice. After this podcast, I mean, I knew what's next. You already created another beautiful podcast called El Divo from Juan Gabriel, which me as a gay man, I really appreciate it. Um, uh,
Yeah.
what's next after these two identity-based podcasts?
I don't know. I'm still figuring it out. Yeah, I'm still figuring it out. I think I want to do I want to write a book, but I'm still dreaming it up in my mind.
Very nice. Anything that you would like to add?
No, no, I think you captured it all. Thank you for
Okay.
thinking.
Well, thanks so much for everything. I really appreciate it.
Great.
Selena's influence is undeniable, and Anything for Selena gives us a deeper look at her lasting legacy. Listen whenever you get your podcast, and for an even closer look, watch our KHOU Plus original Murder Music Legacy, Selena's story, streaming now on KHOU 11 Plus.